Well, in the interest of time, just want to say welcome back to everyone. I hope that you have had time to grab a quick lunch and glad that you're able to rejoin us for today's listening session. Screening and assessment are so important in identifying clients early on in the treatment process. So we are really thankful to be joined today by Steve Kapela from the Zeph Center, Stephanie Geer from Meridian Healthcare, and Scott Anderson from the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services to discuss similarities, differences, and best practices in Ohio. And with that, I will pass it on to our panelists.
Great. Thank you, Corey, and thanks to PG&O for really doing a fantastic job of engineering this conference from all of us together to all of us together online. I know it's not an easy thing, and they've done an amazing job of really seamlessly putting this out for all of us. So big thank you to everybody at PG&O. We wanted to talk today about screening, assessment, identification of folks. This is obviously the first step in identifying your clients, but we have and this is not unique to us here in Ohio. It's across the board of how do you find these folks and how do you engage them into treatment or convert them into a client. So, and one of the things that we've discovered is we get reports from everybody quarterly or half a year, and we have board areas that screen 2,221 people, and they find 0 gamblers, which is statistically impossible. If you just asked everybody in Kroger's, you would be able to get 5 or 6. So we know that there's a way to do this that's effective and a way to do it that's not as effective. So we have with us today 2 of the folks in Ohio that are doing tremendous identification, engagement, and keeping people engaged in completion of treatment. So I won't carry on anymore. We have Steve Kapela and Stephanie Geer. One of you want to go first and one of you want to go second? Ladies first, maybe?
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Okay, Stephanie Geer, take it away.
All right, I'll go ahead and start then. One thing I want to say from our morning presentation today is it's the hidden addiction, right? So we need to ask those questions. We need to make sure that we are assessing, because gambling is a problem. And if it's not asked about, people won't say anything because it's hidden and it's so easy to hide. So let me just give you a little bit of a history of how we started to do screening. When we first started doing it, we were not able to get it into like our electronic health record, right? We weren't able to get it in there. So what we did was we put it into the intake process where the person was filling out demographic information and their presenting problem. They also filled out a questionnaire about gambling. That was obviously not ideal, but it was a start. So that's one thing that I will always encourage is if you're at an organization where gambling screening isn't involved, find a way to get it in there somehow, in some way to sprinkle it in to that intake process. So now what we've been able to do, I'll say probably about like 4 years ago, we were able to get it where it is now included within our assessment process in our EHR and our documentation. And one thing they were mentioning too in the morning presentation was we don't want to just ask, hey, are you gambling? Most of the time people think it's the casino. They don't realize, oh, there's sports betting, there's horse betting, there's bingo and all these other things. People don't think about that. So we want to make sure we are asking those questions. So within our assessment, we list the different forms of gambling, and our assessment counselors have been trained to ask those questions, to ask about engaging in the multiple forms of gambling. But which I'll also say, though, from the morning presentation, I'll say I'm always learning and always grabbing something new from these wonderful conferences that we have. And I love that spending, how much money or how much time are you spending in a certain activity? So I think that's something that I'm going to take back and bring to my organization from this conference. So we put a brief screen going back to that assessment. So now embedded within our assessment documentation is a brief screen. And the screen that we used is called the NODS perk. There are also other screens. There's a BBGS. There's other ones out there. I can't off the top of my head, but there's quite a few brief screens that you can ask that ask 2 to 4 or 5 questions. So we have that included, as well as asking about specific types of gambling and a few other questions to ask about that gambling behavior to help to assess to see if a person does have a problem. And then if they do indicate that they are engaging in gambling, we have further questions within our assessment that ask about the progression and the history of the illness, what areas of life did it impact, relationships, legal, financial, social, mental and emotional, right? We ask all of those questions. And this is embedded within our drug and alcohol section of our assessment. So it is now to a place where I'm really happy with it, and we're able to ask those questions and have it embedded within our assessment process. So one thing I will say about assessment is when you have somebody presenting with an opioid use disorder, gambling's the last thing on their mind. So you might miss people that actually come in and maybe they do have a gambling problem, but they're saying no because they just don't want to feel sick anymore. So we want to make sure that we do screening and stuff throughout our agency as people are entered into treatment because of that. But if you do have somebody, we have somebody who presents and they have an opioid use disorder, let's say, maybe they need an intensive outpatient or a residential treatment level of care. We will, and let's say they do score as having a problem with gambling, those counselors will then contact me and let me know who that patient is, and I'll make a list. I keep them on my radar, so that way I can go in and I can coordinate with their primary counselor to see if at some point within their recovery, do they want to seek services for gambling. So we always try to keep on top of those folks to offer support when it's appropriate in their treatment. And also within our assessment process, if somebody does present as having a problem with gambling, we also administer the SOGs, which this is another gambling screen, but it's more detailed. It asks more questions about the gambling behavior, and that's also administered for us to have a better understanding of the behavior. So the other thing that we do, I mentioned how it's important to continue to do screening throughout people and throughout treatment for folks. And so what we do is we do our best to get into our different areas of programming. So we have like medication assisted treatments, we have intensive outpatient, residential, task. We have all these different programs. And so I go in and I do a presentation about every quarter, every 3 months or so, or in a residential, we try to do it once a month, to go in and do a presentation where I go in, or maybe another counselor who's working with me, and we talk about education. We talk about how is gambling similar? How is it different from substances? What's the difference? What are the risk factors? Why we're here and presenting in that people with substance use disorders are about 15% will develop problems with gambling, right? They're at a higher risk, and giving them that information. And we go over warning signs, what those might look like that could indicate a problem. We look at responsible play and encouraging people to play responsibly. And we administer a screen. So then what I'll do with those screens, I'll score them. We administer the SOGs is what with the screen that we use for that. And we'll score those, and anybody who does score as having a probable gambling disorder, I will reach out to those primary counselors and make that contact with them to encourage that person that if they would be interested in services, that is available for them. Another big piece that I like to do is try to go in. So let's say into sessions. So let's say somebody is in our residential program and they might be interested in getting into gambling treatment because they have a problem. I'll run out there, I'll meet them in person. I think it's just really important to grab that person right then and there, introduce yourself so they have a face to look at that can help to encourage them to seek that support. And then also a big piece of this too is making sure staff is aware, continuing to go into different staffings and educating our clinicians throughout the agency. So that kind of sums up kind of what we do over on this end. I'm sure I might have missed some things. I might think of when Steve goes and starts talking about his. But thank you all for letting me be here today, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's interesting. Stephanie is on one side of Ohio and I am on the other. And And I've never been to her facility and she's never been to mine. And I think it's important to understand there is no right way or wrong way. There is only the way that will work for your agency. And to put it in perspective, our program is embedded in a huge old nursing home. And we probably have at any given time, maybe 1,000 SUD clients in various forms of treatment, detox 3.1, 3.5, residential programs, all the way to outpatient therapy. And we have never been successful in screening at the front door. And Stephanie sort of touched on this. People come in the facility for basically opiate-based addictions is primarily what it is right now. And to talk about gambling as an unknown quantity, and they don't know how that will affect their ability to get the services that they want. And it's not their primary concern. At Zeph Center, we will usually let people come into the program. And then once a week on Wednesdays, I go in and I do a 1-hour group every week on behavioral addictions. And we talk about gambling and how behavioral addictions interact with substance-based addictions. And again, like Stephanie described, how they're similar, how they're different. And then once a month in those groups, we will screen for SOGs. And we will also go throughout the entire facility and screen and do these educational groups in every group in the facility. So that's between me and my counselor, Megan Cunningham, that's quite a few groups. And we touch a lot of people with the SOG screens. And historically, when you give people information about behavioral-based addictions and how it interacts with their substance-based addictions, and how many people come in here struggling with multiple addictions and not just one, then all of a sudden you start seeing the light bulb turn on in people's heads. And they start recognizing, you know, if I'm here and if I'm going to work on this, maybe I should start working on all of these things. So historically, and I've been doing this for quite a while, we identify about 1 out of 5 of our substance use disorder clients in all the forms of treatment that are here is also having a co-occurring gambling disorder. Well, that doesn't mean that everyone will come into treatment, but as we all know, people end up coming into treatment. We may see some of them many times. And what I've observed is maybe the first time they came to treatment, they scored a 2 on the SOGs. And maybe the second time they came to treatment, they scored a 5 on the SOGs. And the fourth time they came to treatment, they came directly to my office, beating on my door, begging to get into the gambling program because they realized that they will never have financial responsibility or security unless they're addressing all of these issues. I think the other thing, and Stephanie, I think this is true in her facility too. Stephanie is the gambling counselor at her facility. I'm the gambling guy. I'm the guy they walk down the hall and they're singing the old Kenny Rogers gambling song to me. And everybody knows me as the gambling guy. I know every gambling joke that has ever been told because I've heard it 400 times. But I'm the gambling person. And when you become that person, then I think the program really starts to take on some legs. And Stephanie would probably agree that if people come back, they know who you are and they know if this is applying to them. And so we've been very successful in our program, not for any specific thing other than we continue to screen all through the process of a person's treatment program. We screen when they're about 2 weeks in, and then every 4 weeks through that while they're in residential therapy, and then about every 6 weeks after that as they go through other therapy forms. And we've also started to go to other agencies, not to their treatment programs, but to their residential housing units and do behavioral addiction presentations and screen for SOGs And that is really actually turning out to be quite successful. And we didn't meet with near the resistance that we thought that we might. But I think in totality, it's allowed us to develop a very robust gambling clientele. I think that's really the strength of the Zeff Center approach to this. And
Thank you, Steve. Both Steve and Stephanie mentioned the SOGS. That's the South Oaks gambling screen. And you can find that screen and several other screens on the Mental Health and Addiction Services website. If you go to the Get Help tab, there's a Get Set Before You Bet tab, and there's a Resources tab, or you can Google SOGS or South Oaks gambling screen or SOGS, SOGS gambling, and you'll see it. It's in the public domain, easily downloaded and used for your program. But there's a lot of different, and both Stephanie and Steve touched on this. It's not really a right or a wrong way. There's just more effective ways to do this. So, the culture of your agency, your knowledge, the type of clients that come through your door, where they are in the process, the stages of change. There's lots and lots and lots and lots of factors that go into identifying these folks, but planting those seeds along the way, like both Stephanie and Steve mentioned, that they're known, they're the gambling person in the agency. They've asked the questions. They've done an education group. They've made themselves available. So very important aspects that need to be touched on along the way. Does Steve or Stephanie, did you want to add any?
I just have to say, I noticed in the chat that Heather and Megan are saying they get called the gambling lady, and that's me as well. I'm the gambling lady. So we got the gambling guy and the gambling ladies. And so what I'll say with that is when I go into residential or something like that, and then maybe I'll see somebody that has now gone to like intensive outpatient, I might see them at a different location, like, oh, hey, you're the gambling lady. I remember you came in. And I think that's so important about planting those seeds, right? That's what's so important, is for them to know that there is help out there, whether it's for them or if it is for somebody else that they love and care about, to know that help is out there, and it's a program that's grant funded that can help them at no cost. And so I just think that that's really great for us to be able to plant those seeds and get known throughout our communities.
It's really fascinating, I think. And they talked in the last presentation, which was excellent, by the way, about gambling being the hidden addiction. And it truly is, because a problem gambler doesn't smell like he's been gambling. He doesn't stumble around like he won't nod out. He's not staring at the floor like some addictions. But a problem gambler can get themselves to a place that most other people who struggle with addiction never can. And I think it's why you see the suicide rates that we do. I'm a recovery guy, and you can drink a lot. You can spend a lot of money in a day drinking. You can spend a lot of money in a day doing cocaine. You can spend a lot of money in a day doing opiates. But I've had people come into my office who said that in an afternoon they lost $60,000, their entire life savings, and went from a place of affluence and respect to utter destruction in a matter of hours. And that journey, I think, is what makes gambling such a painful and gut-wrenching addiction, and why you see the suicidal ideation and completion rates that we do. Because gamblers have an ability to hurt themselves in a way that other addictions don't necessarily do. If you're addicted to any substance, your life financially is probably in decline as you dedicate more resources to your drug addiction or alcoholism. But gamblers are stoned, many times are sober, or whatever word you want to use, and can maintain that illusion of having it all together, and until you can't and it all comes apart. And I think that's really tough to recognize. It used to be pre-COVID that 80% of our clients came internally through our education groups and through our SUD population. But now post-COVID, right now we're about 50-50 of people coming in from the outside and people that we're treating that we're identifying internally. And so, and I had the first person in my office who was a Facebook gamer, gambling on some type of helmets and playing cards, and he had spent tens of thousands of dollars on it. And it was really eye opening what's happening out there and how fast things are evolving.
Yeah, I popped on. I wanted to ask you to something as being, who you are, the gambling people at your premier agencies. It's something I've been thinking about. I guess the marketing might not be the right word, but how you let folks know about your gambling services, because we were just talking about integrating gambling questions into assessments, right? Not having a separate questionnaire or screen or assessment for gambling, that these things are best to be integrated. I'm also just thinking about how you let folks know you have gambling services. Should gambling services be highlighted? Because I to me, and I've talked about this before, it kind of seems like a double-edged sword to say something in I'm just making this up, but in the realm of, the Zeph Center treats mental health, addiction, and gambling. Okay, so that highlights that you have gambling services, but then it also, well, isn't gambling mental health? Isn't gambling and addiction? Why would you say and gambling? So I'm curious just like how some of that outreach or even just verbiage at your two agencies lets folks know you have gambling services, because obviously it needs to be, we know that people have co-occurring conditions, comorbid conditions, all this needs to be treated together and identified together. But then also, how do we let folks know premier gambling services are available without keeping it also on the outside? Because I think sometimes if it is highlighted, it can then also be on the periphery and it's not then fully integrated in. I guess, you understand what I'm saying? And do you have any thoughts on that?
Stephanie?
Yeah, I'll go ahead on that. I do a lot of different outreach for prevention, right? So that's where you go in. And so I kind of wear these two different hats. I'm a clinician, then I got to take that hat off, then I'm going to be a preventionist, right? We got to look at how can we make people aware that we exist. And so there's a whole different variety of things that we do. But one thing I will say that we're doing, like for March, is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. So we have two different billboards, we have a radio ad. I know even on news stations, I actually, and I know, Steve, I think you've been interviewed. I know, Scott, you are all the time. We're always, they're running stories for us. So we get to go on the news and share that we do have programming and help people to become aware that gambling can become a problem. Health fairs. I go to different health fairs. I have a resource table specifically for gambling. Going to colleges. I go into college campuses. Well, it's virtual now, but YSU, have gone into Akron, going into Kent here in Trumbull County, where I'm at, going and spreading, just providing that education. So then when I go in that classroom, even if it's just one kid that grabs onto that to remember that, then to pass it along if they need to. And so it's just really about spreading that education in any ways that you can and getting creative with it. Because even with that, I would go into our prevention programming within our school systems that we had, which obviously has changed because of COVID, but previously I'd be involved in those different things. I provide information to these kids. And I've had kids that come up to me and have said, my grandma goes to the casino all the time. I think she may have a problem. I give that kid a resource.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to get out there and sort of provide that information in that capacity. Is that kind of what you were looking for?
Yeah. And then I'll be interested to hear from Steve as well, just because Steve, you mentioned you're that 50-50 now, people coming in for gambling services and then 50 from who are there for other services. And I just say that because one of the silver linings of all of this has been we've been able to reach so many folks in our introductory stage 1 trainings because they've been held virtually. So more and more people have been able to attend those, because of the lack of needing to travel and stay over and whatnot. So we've been getting a lot of people who are new to the field and new to having gambling services at their agencies. So I think this was great to let them know how effective and successful screening has been done, but then also, maybe a little bit more for them, Steve, about, how are people hearing about the Zeph Center to come in for gambling services, but then also the teasing out of some gambling problems that exist within the folks that you already are treating as well.
I think it's really interesting in that we view gambling in the context of a behavioral addiction or a process addiction. And so when we talk about it internally, or even our prevention folks, when we talk about it in presentations, we have the ability to handle not only substance-based addictions, but behavioral-based addictions. And when I say process addictions, I'm talking about obviously relationships and codependence and food and sugar and gambling and rage and shopping and religious cults and all those types of things. Because really, in a sense, if you're not at least talking about all of it, are you really working on all of the problem? And externally, I recorded a couple of, because I have a somewhat distinctive voice, I guess, recorded a couple of radio commercials where we talk about the warning signs of gambling and how would you recognize someone who has a gambling problem. And those are playing right now in Problem Gambling Awareness Month. And I think people identify with that. And a lot of people struggle with understanding an addiction that's not based on a substance. But I think most people can understand the consequences of it. And it's sort of fascinating. In Lucas County alone, the last prevalence study from OMAS said that over 3,600 people in Lucas County alone may meet the criteria for problem gambling. That's enough to keep a lot of agencies busy. And yet, not everyone is reaching out and trying to identify, or at least not effectively trying to identify those clients. And I think, Mike, you ask a really good question, and I don't know that there's one good answer. I think there's a multitude of them, and it's going to depend on that specific little piece of population, that we're talking about, whether we're talking about, because I think casino gamblers are a different breed of people. I think that's the wrong way to say it, than lottery players versus online gamblers, or maybe more terrifying than that, young children gambling within video game venues and loot boxes and skins, which last year's gambling conference, that presentation was fascinating.
Yeah. A little bit of a loaded question, but yeah, I just wanted some of your thoughts from folks who've been doing it for so long at some big agencies. So go ahead, Scott. Yeah.
No, we're not asking anybody to add another service or another thing. We're asking you to incorporate this within the services that you are already providing. The people are already there. These folks are in our midst. So, just to ask the questions. If you have a DUI program, if you have a detox program, if you have a intensive outpatient program, throw a few of these questions into the mix. You'd be surprised how many people you find.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and think about it, Scott, to follow up on that. If you have a DUI program, you have a person who's interacting with the courts. If you have any specialty program, you have people who are interacting, and gambling is going to be very much the same way. You need a person who is educated and skilled in that regard, like Stephanie, who is out advocating for that program and building a clientele. And I think, Stephanie, you can't handle anymore all by yourself. and I, I'm thankful I have Megan Cunningham, because she's allowed us to continue to expand. And I think that's the important thing, is you have to have a person who's going to lead the charge in your agency and develop what's going to be appropriate for your particular situation.
And
And
there
I'll
are,
leave with one short story. Steve and Stephanie both mentioned it. Heather mentioned it in the chat. You all know, and people listening, some of them listening, know that I do a lot of college programming. And I was once at a pizzeria down near a college campus I did programming at, and there was a college student behind the counter making pizzas, and he said, "Hey, you're the gambling guy." So he remembered that I did a presentation at his school, and so it is cool to be that person, and the people that look to you for knowledge content and awareness and services that maybe they're not getting elsewhere. So that is kind of cool to get that label. Not all labels are great, but that's a good one.
and remember, there's lots and lots and lots of resources available. All of us are available to anyone who has a question. You can reach out to any of us. We can direct you. PG&O has a tremendous training curriculum and opportunity. There's stage 1, stage 2, advanced, the supervision fellowship, the warm transfer project. There's lots of opportunities to get involved. Please, please, please reach out if you have any questions or want any more information about anything. One of us is bound to know the answer or know who does.
Well said.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives, and just want to reiterate Steve's point on the importance of screening during the intake process as well as during groups. Also, if you have staff that are only doing screening, it's important that they are knowledgeable about gambling and the gambling specific counselors at their agency or in the area. We've actually had a number of assessors at our trainings here recently, and as Mike pointed out, due to the virtual nature, we've been able to kind of expand those and had a lot of assessors at our trainings here recently. And I just can't overstate the importance of them having that training and that knowledge to identify problem in disordered gambling. So yeah, just want to again thank you all, Scott, Steve, and Stephanie. We're going to take a break from now until 1 o'clock when we resume with Olu Oyedele discussing the effects of COVID-19 on online gambling.
Good seeing you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.